Welcome to Small Arm Solutions. Today I'm actually really excited to be bringing you this rifle. We're going to be looking at the AR18/180 today. This is a rifle I've been wanting to bring to you guys for quite some time, but thanks to one of our viewers out here in Waco, Texas, he's provided this with me so I can show you this incredible rifle. Now, I titled this video The Most Successful Failure of the Last Century because this rifle was a complete disaster for as far as its military testing and so forth, and it was dismissed back in the 60s. It did go into production for the semi-automatic only until around 1980 or so, but military-wise, this gun never really made it. However, this design has been copied and is utilized in most of the modern-day military designs, which we will talk about in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about this rifle. We're talking about where it came from. Going back to the early 1960s, around 61 and 62, in that time period is when Armalite was unable to sell the AR-15 to the government. So they had sold the rights to Colt's manufactured Colt's Defense for the AR-10 and AR-15. Unfortunately, once they sold those rights, part of those rights was the use of Gene Stoner's internal piston system, or his direct gas piston system. He was no longer able to use that. So any weapons he would have to develop from that point on could not use his system. So after the AR-15 came a rifle called the AR-16. Now the AR-16 was an external piston, very similar to what you see here in the AR-18, AR180, chambered in 7.62. Utilized a heavy wooden stock and pistol grip. It was made very differently than the AR-15. The AR-15 in that time period was a lot more expensive to manufacture due to the fact that you have precision machining out of forging 775 T6 aircraft grade aluminum. And very common in that day was the use of stamped sheet metal, such as the AKM. Stamped sheet metal is much easier to work with. It requires less sophisticated tooling. It can be done in a much lower budget type machine shop. It's very reproducible. It does not have the quality, obviously, as of the aircraft grade aluminum forgings do, but then again, you're looking at a rifle that's significantly cheaper to manufacture. Now, the AR-16 never really saw too much interest from anybody. Then they came up with what they call the AR-18, which is basically what you see here, with the exception of it being a selective fire. Now, this rifle has many, many changes from the AR-15. There's not too much actually similar about it at all. In fact, for as far as parts commonality, there's absolutely nothing here that has commonality with the parts. But we're talking about what the AR-18 was. Selective fire rifle. Again, the system was designed to be manufactured cheaply and efficiently. Starting on the front, we would have a standard 20-inch chrome line barrel. Now, of course, back when these were manufactured, this was at the time of the M193. There was no, 62 grain ammunition yet. It was a 1 12-inch twist. And you had the flash suppressor, which has the three-prong. And I will say that the three-prong flash suppressor is a much more efficient than the bird cage. There were other reasons that it was changed out on the M16, such as getting caught in vegetation. In fact, the troops were using to open up crates, which was causing barrels to bend and so forth. We have a two-piece handguard. The bottom piece is not removable. This is a self-regulating system. There's no gas valve on this. You have a pinned-on front sight base with a bayonet lug, front sight post. Now, we're going to get into to the guts of this in a few minutes, but we have a stamped upper and lower receiver. It opens up very similar to that of the AR-15 M16, except you're using a push pin. And as you push this in, it opens up just like so. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Now, you do have a ambidextrous safety on here. You do have a side folding stock by pushing in on these two pins. It folds to the rear. And we have a standard M16 type rotating bolt locking mechanism, dual recoil springs. Now, let's talk a little bit about how this thing works. First, what we're going to do is we're going to take this thing apart. We're going to show you how it works. Now, for disassembly, this is very, very simple. We have a push button on here. We're going to push in, and we can shotgun it just like you do a standard AR-15 M16. We pull the recoil spring assembly out. As you can see, we have two recoil springs. Pull rearward on the bolt carrier group, and we'll pull the lever right out. And now the bolt comes right out. We have a removable pin in the front. Separates the upper and lower receiver. Now, once we remove the recoil springs, we can lift the handguard right off the top, exposing the operating system. Now, to remove the gas system, all we're going to do is we're going to pull back on the operating rod, remove the piston, remove the operating rod and spring, And there we have it. There's the system. Now this does not come. This you would have to literally unscrew that for the bottom one to come out. So there's no need for that. Now looking on the top here, we do have an injection port dust cover. Now of course we don't have it in the front. We just have it in the rear, so it blocks the track where the charging handle goes back and forth. On top, what we have here is a scope mount. You are able to mount a scope on the top of here. You'll notice we do have a long sight radius. We have two apertures, a short range and a long range. We have a windage knob, which is adjustable for windage only. And in the front, we have very similar to that of the AR-15 M16 with a front sight post, which is adjustable for elevation only. Now, looking in closer here, you can see that we do have the welds in here. Again, this is not nearly manufactured to the same precision as the AR-15 M16. And you can see that we have the similar type of a barrel extension we do on that of the AR-15 M16. We're taking a close look at the lower receiver right now. Now, as we can see, this is all stamp sheet metal, and we can see welds. As you can see, the trigger mechanism is much different than that of the standard AR-15. You do have your bolt release. Now, you have a bolt catch on here. The only way to release is to actuate the charging handle. There's no manual bolt release on here. And you have your manual safety, and you can see how this is written, safe and semi. Now, we also have, very similar to that of the HK, you'll see the welds on both the front here and also around the magazine release. You're going to notice that the magazine release is on the right side. The initial version of this rifle that was tested by the U.S. military, this was tested twice by the U.S. military. The first model had the exact same magazine as the AR-15 M16. They found because there's a lot of rattling, they had caused problems with failures to feed, so they moved the magazine release to the right side where they changed the magazine. As you can see, that the magazine slit here is far smaller than that of the AR-15. And that held this much more secure and much more stable. It got rid of those failures to feed issues. Now, initially, the rifle did not have the safe and semi on the right-hand side. That was something that the military had requested change. Now, if you go to the second time that it was tested, for its own durability, reliability, it was a retest. And then there was a comparison between that and the M16A1 as the control rifle. Some of the issues that were found were, first, the hammer. They were having issues with the hammer brake. That was probably due to heat treating more so than anything else. They had issues with the automatic sear braking as well. They had problems with some of these welds that were breaking. And they also had problems with the firing pin. Let's take the bolt apart and take a look at the firing pin. Now, as you can see, our cam pin is on the side, and we have a chrome-plated bolt carrier group. Disassembly, very similar to that of the AR-15 M16. Firing pin retaining pin, firing pin spring. The firing pin spring was one of the components that there was issues with for as far as breaking one of the edges. And that was also probably a heat treating issue as well. Now we remove the bolt right out the front after we remove the cam pin. And as you can see, the bolt is nearly identical to that of the AR-15 M16 with the addition of not having the cuts back here for the gas rings, which are used for the internal piston system. Due to this being external piston, you don't need to have any kind of fitting on here to keep the bolt tight. And if you remove the extractor the exact same way, you'll see an extractor which is identical to that of the AR-15 M16 rifle as well. So the testing that went on with these, the rifle did experience several issues. And in the end, it was not as reliable as the M16. They did have a lot more malfunctions, more failures. The Army did feel that the rifle did have merit, that it did have potential military issue, but it had a lot more development that needed to be had before it was capable of being a candidate for our service rifle. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but first we're going to put this sucker back together. Now again, like a regular M16, you drop your extractor on like so. Extractor pin. Going to drop the bolt in like so. Make sure your extractor is facing the right. Drop our cam pin in. You need to make sure you have your spring on your firing pin. This also dealt with the issues as far as having slam fires due to primers that were too sensitive. Push the firing pin in place like so. We're going to go ahead and put the gas system back together. And you'll notice that this rifle vents gas up at the front towards the front sight base. You can see the vents right here. Forward like so. I'm going to drop in the operating rod. Insert the piston. there you have it. Very, very simple. Very, very simple, very, very durable, very reliable. We're going to drop the handguard on like so. Now, when we put the recoil spring back in, you can see that goes forward. These go right through the pieces of plastic on the handguard, and it locks the handguard in place. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drop the bolt in the unlock position. And we're going to line up like so we can insert our charging handle. And we're going to drop the receiver, insert our pin. Put the hammer in the cock position. Safety on. Going to insert the recoil spring. And we're going to push that little button in. There we have it. And there's your magazine. Now, this particular one is a 40-round magazine. These normally came with 20-round magazines. Taking a closer look at the ejection port cover. The bolt comes back. It opens the port cover. As you can see, it does lock to the rear, but in order for you to release the bolt, it has to be done manually. Unfortunately, the AR-18 was very limited in production. You had only about 1,171 AR-18 selective fire rifles that were ever manufactured. However, commercially, it did a little bit better. It was manufactured by a couple companies. You did have some that were made in Costa Mesa by Armalite. Armalite was never set up to be a manufacturing facility. It was more thought up to be as a design firm or a think tank, not as an actual weapons manufacturer. There was definitely potential for commercial sales. So between Costa Mesa and Sterling out of the UK and Howa out of Japan, there's approximately 21,478 of these rifles manufactured for commercial sales. They're not very common any longer. They're very hard to come by. In fact, the nice gentleman who loaned this to me, I tried to see if I could trade him a rifle for it, but he wouldn't do it. But as hard as it's going to be to send this thing back, I will. I'll do it. I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to do it. Now, the rifle had a rebirth in 2001 by Armalite out of Geneseo, Illinois. That was by Mark Westrom. Mark Westrom was very fond of this weapons platform, and he decided he wanted to do a more modernized version of it. So what he released was what he called the AR180B. Very similar to what you were to see here, however, it used a polymer lower receiver and it used standard M16 type magazines. And for as far as the barrel was concerned, it was brought out in 2001, and as you know, the assault weapon ban was in effect at that point in time. So he had to use a fixed stock, and he had to use a muzzle brake instead of the flash suppressor. Now, of course, he did have parts on hand, so once the sunset of the assault weapon ban was, you were able to get the standard flash suppressor and put it on there if you were able to break the weld without a problem. But that rifle did not go very well. It was discontinued relatively quickly due to just lack of interest. I mean, it was only in production until 2007. I would love to see a remake of this rifle come back in its original configuration, because it is extremely significant and for as far as modern day weapons development. The first test was in 1965 by the United States military, and they basically felt that it was basically a good design. There were issues as far as a positive failure to the locking system, failure to feed. He had some issues with some of the sub-assemblies that were not working properly. The rifle was it was not durable enough for military sales. And again, the gun did show potential merit, but it was not ready for prime time. The Army was asked again in 1970 to do a re-examine of it. Now, there were several issues that had come up that the Armalite company was able to fix. There were several deficiencies and several shortcomings that the rifle had that they did respond to. One of them was the safety. Another one was the magazine. There were several other ones. Now, the findings that they found was most of the testing was done on fully automatic. And unfortunately, at that point is where you started to see some of the failures. You saw the failures of the auto sear. You saw failures on the hammer itself. You saw failures to feed. Another issue was this was a self-regulating rifle, but you also had a lot of issues for as far as environmental. The changes in the pressures from hot weather to cold weather, and different types of propellants. Having 5.56 ammunition loaded with different propellants did mess around with the accuracy and the timing of this rifle that did affect the accuracy of it. The rifle also suffered from severe bolt carrier bounce. Bolt carrier bounce is where when the bolt goes forward to lock, the bolt carrier trips the auto sear, but at the moment the bolt carrier strikes the barrel extension, the bolt carrier bounces back enough to suffice to unlock, so when the hammer strikes, the breech isn't closed, therefore you have a failure to fire. Bolt carrier bounce was a severe issue, especially with the variations in ammunition. The rifle also experienced a significant amount of short strokes, basically, which was due to issues with timing and different propellants. The bolt would not go all the way to the rear far enough to strip the cartridge off of the magazine or to lock open the last shot. That was another major issue that the rifle did have. Now, looking at the test, there's many improvements made from 1965 to 1970. The change in the magazine was to ensure that the rifle had a direct feed from the magazine into the chamber for as far as reliability of feeding. Another part of the changeover to the magazine was the elimination of the feed ramps on the barrel extension and making the feed basically coming right from the magazine into the chamber. Another issue that happened was the hammer pin would walk out, and there was a snap ring that was put on, or a J-spring put on the hammer, very similar to that of the AR-15 M16 to keep that pin locked in place. Another issue they had with the extractor, with this they found out, again, most of this was fully automatic, was there was a lot of shaving of brass from the extractor cutting into the extractor, and all those shavings would get underneath the extractor and it would cause failures to extract. That was another issue they had to have some geometry that was fixed in there to keep all that chipping from taking place. And also the gas piston bracket on the earlier test was coming loose. They had to have some torque specifications on that to keep that from coming loose. Now the flash hider was also improved to assist with muzzle climb. And as you can see from the bottom, you can see how we still have a 3-position suppressor, but we have the bottom that is more solid. So it's similar to that of an M16A2 for as far as having the solid bottom to keep the blast going up to help keep the muzzle down. Now we're going to talk a little about the comparisons between the M16A1 and the AR18. It was certainly found that the AR18 ran cleaner than the direct gas system. There was certainly no question of that. However, the AR18, they did say it was a little bit easier to maintain than the M16. There was a little bit less parts for as far as losing. However, the M16 did a lot better in unlubricated testing. The M16A1 was much better for as far as the extremes in ammunition, for as far as different propellants, as well as temperature. It was far more reliable for as far as the overall operating system. The AR18 had 27 criteria it was supposed to meet. It only met 17 of them. Malfunction rates. Now, there was definitely a major difference between the malfunction rates between the AR18 and the M16. In 1,000 rounds, the M16A1 would have a 2.18 means round between failure. The AR18 would have 3.77. In 30,000 rounds, the M16A1 had 2.77 malfunctions, and the AR18 had 6.67 mean round between failures. So there was definitely a reliability issue. So in the end results, for as far as Army testing was concerned, they liked the rifle. They definitely saw that there were some merits behind it. It was definitely less expensive, but it needed to be developed further. And therefore, the Army recommended that before this rifle is resubmitted again, there needed to be significant more development that was done before they took another look at it, which they never did. That's not the end of the story for the AR-18, though. The true legacy for the AR-18 is not the AR-18 in general. It was its operating system. Its operating system would go on to be used by some of the most prolific firearms that we have today. Shown right here is the HK G36/XM8. As you can see by looking at this carrier group, virtually identical to that of the AR-18. Over here we have the FN SCAR. And if we look over, we have the exact same operating mechanism. Right here we have the CZ Bren 805. Very much identical to that. Right here we see that of the ACR. And this one here is the Bushmaster M15. And the one that we have over here, you'll see, is the Tavor. Very, very similar. Additionally, ones we need to talk about too, it was used in the Leaders Mark V T2. Also the SA-80 British rifle as well as the AAA SAP rifle, which was basically an updated version of the Leaders rifle. So as you can see, there's extreme lineage from this rifle to all the modern day rifles. This is exactly why I said this is the most successful failure of the last century. The rifle did not do well, but it went on to have its design copied by some of the most prolific designs in the industry. What we're going to do now is we're going to take this thing out to the range and we're going to see how it shoots. Now, due to the fact that this is an old girl and I did not want to put a lot of rounds through it, we only put about, I'd say like 100, 150 rounds through it at most. Standard 5.56 XM193 and SIG 223 ball. Interesting thing about the ammunition was the velocities. The XM193, you were looking at about 2,100 feet a second. The Federal XM193, you're looking at about 3,100 feet a second. Then we went over to the SIG 55 grain full metal jacket, and it dropped down to about 2,850. So there's definitely a big difference in velocity between the Federal XM193 and the SIG 223. Well, let's see how she shoots. Overall, I only shot at 25 yards. I didn't want to put a lot of rounds through it. The target I'm showing you here is only a 25-yard target with iron sights, but as you can see, it was quite impressive. Again, we didn't really do any long-range testing with it. The rifle's recoil is very, very pleasant. The trigger was a little bit on the rough side, but considering that this is a military rifle and considering the time it was made, I think it was pretty damn good as well. Handguards do get a little bit hot on it, but this thing functioned 100%. We had no reliability issues with it whatsoever. I really enjoy this rifle. This is the significance of this in history. Most people don't even know the AR18 or AR180 even existed, let alone know the fact that some of our most modern designs now adhere to a lot of its design principles. Gene Stoner, this was his last attempt while working at Armalite. For the most part, after that, he went over to Cadillac Gauge, where he went on with the Stoner 63 and additional weapon systems. I think Stoner was probably a little bit dismayed when he no longer could use his operating system. He used his AR-15 M16, which he felt was a superior design. But again, once that patent was sold, there's nothing else that he could do with it. The AR-18 never really saw any combat other than with the IRA in Northern Ireland. That was pretty much the only place where you saw any combat with it. And those were generally AR-180s that were sub-automatic only. They weren't the selective fire ones. Selective fire ones remain in a lot of personal collections. Most of those are. They're very, very expensive. And one of the sad issues is you don't have a lot of spare parts for them. If these things were to break, you'd have a very difficult time finding any spare parts for them. So they're extremely valuable in the fact not only with what they are, but if something goes wrong, you're really not going to be able to find the replacement parts for them. I hope you enjoyed this little piece of history. Again, I'm very, very thankful to our viewer down in Waco for letting us borrow this. I'll be getting it back to him most regretfully very soon. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, even better, share.